Looks to be about 12:30, so I think we'll get started. Welcome to Tales from the Wasteland. As I move forward in my slideshow. How's everybody doing? Everybody here? Everybody sober? Close enough. My name is Alexander Brandon, and I want to thank everybody for making it here today. I'm with a company called Funky Rustic, and we do audio production work for all manner of video games. And I've been in the industry for roughly about 20 years, starting with Straylight Productions and working with Epic Games, having done some music for games like Unreal and Unreal Tournament and Deus Ex. And then moving on, being an audio director, working for companies like Midway and Obsidian Entertainment. And at Obsidian Entertainment is how I met these guys, the In Exile people, that I'll explain exactly how we got to Wasteland 2. But that's essentially a short version of my story. Now, if we had internet access, I'd show you the Kickstarter video. How many people here have heard of Wasteland 2? Oh, great. Okay, so how many people here have seen the Kickstarter for Wasteland 2? Okay, so most of you have seen that. That's great. This is a sequel to a game with very deep roots in old school RPGs for computers, and with the original Wasteland being on the Apple and IBM PCs. Being released, I believe, in 1988. And Wasteland was the forerunner of the original Fallout game. And how many people here have played any of the Fallout games from 1 to, Fallout 3, show of hands? Fallout 2. Awesome. Okay. How about the first one? Fantastic. That's great. So yeah, Wasteland was really sort of the seed that planted Fallout. And Brian Fargo at Interplay essentially ran Interplay for a long period of time. And I don't know how many people here have heard recently the announcement about the next In Exile game that's coming out soon. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So Interplay was one of, essentially back in the day, there were two major computer role-playing game companies, Interplay and Origin. And Origin's based in Austin, Texas, founded by Richard Garriott. And Interplay by Brian Fargo. And I've been lucky and blessed enough to be able to work with both of those guys, but I'm working on a more sort of regular basis with Brian and his teams at In Exile. Interplay had some ups and downs. It went through a number of really successful franchises, and not the least of which is stuff like Wasteland and Fallout, but also Star Trek. They managed to get the license and put out one of the first Star Trek games, Star Trek 25th Anniversary. And then they did a number of console titles, a number of sports titles, and offshoots of other things until they were bought by Titus, a French company, and eventually they went bankrupt. They're still around, owned by different people. So Brian Fargo and his group founded a team called In Exile, and they started a number of successful Kickstarter campaigns. One of the first Kickstarter campaigns to generate, a lot of money, 2.9 million, I believe, for this project. So it's a blessing that the fans and the people that really enjoy these games come back and they say, look, we really still want this, and we're going to pay money. We're going to pay through the nose in order to actually get a sequel to Wasteland or a sequel to Planescape Torment, another project that I'm working on, and their latest project, which is going to be the next Bard's Tale. So yeah, if you guys haven't heard that announcement, it's coming, and it's going to be another crowdfunding effort, and they can take all my money for that one. So yeah, where it all started. So what is really special about Kickstarter? Well, Kickstarter, as you can see here, it makes it possible for people that really want to do bigger scope games, but not AAA scope games, to do that. And that's things that franchises that have these kind of followings are able to essentially be developed the way that developers want to make them. And that's exactly, it's a great thing to do. And I'll give you some inside dirt if I don't have that on a bullet point. Yes, smaller teams. Like the secret to the sauce is not like building a 200-person team, hiring and firing. Like that's it's still a common practice among AAA projects, and it's something that folks like me, Brian Fargo, and actually quite a lot of other people are saying, we really don't think that's a good idea. We don't want to promise someone a career and then, dash their dreams. We want to be able to make it clear that we make it on a project-to-project basis. That doesn't inspire a huge amount of confidence for somebody that says like, oh, I want like a steady job. But you want to know something? Look at the reality of it. People come together, they get a bunch of money to make something, and then that project is successful, which enables them to potentially make something else or do an expansion of what they have or whatever. It's really common sense when you think about how that whole thing works. And game companies over the years are like, no, we'll just form a company, get a bunch of funding, get a bunch of investment, and we'll be able to run nice and solid with 250 people for 10 years, 20 years. Nah, that's not really how it works at all. On the audio side of things, with Funky Rustic's role, I think I get to that later on here. I'll describe that in a minute. But we're able to focus on the things in the game that really need the highest possible priority. Like we're not in a position to like go in and like the whole see a bear, hear a bear thing, which is something that a colleague of mine told me was his philosophy on how to do audio, and that's a good thing when you've got a big budget. But we had to look at various aspects of the game that really needed a lot of focus, like cinematics, like the skill system in there. How many people here played Wasteland 2, by the way? I might as well ask. That's great. So it is a fun game. It's a really great role-playing game that has like a lot of deep, rich storyline. It has a lot of options for being able to generate your characters and your party, and a lot of surprises along the way in which you may not necessarily be ready for. But hey, save games are great for everything, right? No, it's also not incredibly punishing. It's just something that you need to be able to strategize. It's got the best of what I consider the XCOM. Or the original XCOM. Anybody here play that? Yeah, the original XCOM. It's got a lot of strategic elements that derive from the original XCOM, along with more standard RPG fare that are very forgiving, and you get to essentially keep playing and growing your characters. So another great thing about Kickstarter is you get to connect directly with the people that are the fans of your product, and that's with In Exile, they did that big time. They would have backer shrines, like the people that donated the most money would literally get a level made for them, and like I would do custom audio for it, and there would be like this shrine they would walk up to that would make a certain noise, and they'd request whatever they really wanted. Like it could be a symbol of an Atari joystick that would just be sitting there. People could walk up to and look at it and be like, you don't know what this is or why it's here, but that really that doesn't happen in AAA. It's something where, like I said, you get a direct connectivity to the fans, and they love it, and they pay more money for stuff like that. Yeah, so the overall budget was initially $2.9 million, which is not like the biggest budget in the world for a role-playing game, but it's something that In Exile was able to make a smaller team, and make it happen. So the budget for the audio asset integration was roughly $130K, which is honestly, pretty darn healthy, and it's not something that I sneeze at or sniff at in any way, shape, or form. It was great to be able to get in. Essentially, we were able to produce all the audio for the game with like multiple folks over roughly about a year. And then on the In Exile side, so essentially I operated out of Texas, north of Austin, in a city called Georgetown. These folks In Exile are in Newport Beach in California, and so we operated remotely. So on their side, they would have a guy, his name's Ben Moyes, and he was amazing because essentially everything that we weren't able to do, he did. That was because the engine that we were using was pretty much raw Unity with this plug-in engine called Clockstone, gotten off the Unity Asset Store, and I will get to that in a minute. So there's actually that's not a great representation of the team at In Exile, but there are some people there actually that I'm working with now. So starting from I guess it would be your right. I actually don't know who the guy in the beard is, but the guy to his left, that's bald with the goatee, is Colin McCombs, and he is the lead writer on Torment: Tides of Numenera. Anybody here have heard of Torment: Tides of Numenera? Oh yes, awesome. That's the game that we're working on right now. So next to him, with the sort of light shirt standing, or actually, I'm sorry, next to him. That's kind of in the back is Matt Finley, who's the president of Exile. Next to him is Tony Evans, who is one of the writers. And next to him, again, sort of in the back with the dark hair, is Kevin Saunders, who's the lead producer on Torment. So this was the only picture I could find of these guys. I did ask them for one because like most of the Wasteland team isn't represented, and Brian Fargo's not here, but whatever. I'm working with a lot of these guys now. They're all great. Okay, so you've got In Exile, you've got Funky Rustic, and the guy on the bottom is the guy who made the music happen. His name is Mark Morgan, and he is a great composer, great guy to work with. He does a lot of TV, he does some film, and he did the soundtrack for the original Planescape Torment. He did the soundtrack for Wasteland 2, and he is currently working on the soundtrack for Torment: Tides of Numenera. That's correct, yes. The music budget, I'm not quite sure what it was. I wasn't privy to what they paid for that, but yeah. For audio or for everything. Well, it was 2.9 million for the initial Kickstarter, and then after that they probably brought in like 300 to 400K. But they essentially established their own crowdfunding aspect on their own website so that they didn't have to go through Kickstarter. Yeah, it was over 3. Yes, that's for the whole. That's just for Wasteland 2, whole thing, and I'm sure some of it probably went into company, funding like rent and that sort of thing. So. Well, AAA budgets for a massive like role-playing game or even anything on this scale would probably start in the $10 million range. And it would go like probably closer on average to 15 to 20. Like I'm sure that Dragon Age Insurrection was probably closer to the 60 or $70 million budget. And how many people here have heard of Star Citizen by Roberts Space Industries? You know, I love Wing Commander. I'm really looking forward to Star Citizen, but at the same time, I'm looking at this runaway freight train of a budget, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Okay, well, good luck with that, guys. Okay, so the engine that we used is Unity. And Unity is something. How many people here have heard of Unity? Great. It is the every person's engine. It's something you can download and use. I mean, you can do the same with Unity 4 now, except I think it costs like $20 a month. The thing about Unity is that it can take a little bit to get into and get used to and understand. But there's tons of tutorials, there's a lot of YouTube stuff, and there's a heck of a lot of plugins on their asset store that you can access, which I'll get to audio-wise in a second, and just create games with. So this is, having said that Unity is a great engine, this is what it felt like to make audio using the plugin that we had and the Unity engine in terms of its scripting. It was incredibly antiquated in terms of audio stuff. We're going to do some plug-in power here. And so I know that there was plenty of frustration despite the fact that the engine was very open-ended and the team was able to create really cool stuff with it. On the audio side of things, this guy Ben that I talked about earlier is the one that enabled everything to happen, and without him, right there. Oh, other side? No? I got it. Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I want to have a little round of applause for Chris Serrani because he's enabling me to use his laptop for this today. Thanks, Chris. All right. So like I said, it's Ben would be the guy that would be my gatekeeper to actually integrating everything, and it's not like I could just get into the engine and script everything myself. There was a ton of scripting involved. I know some scripting, and there's but most of it's C#. And it's just like, oh my God, exactly how am I going to actually just make sure that this particular scripted sequence of animations in the game is going to get audio? I have no clue even where to look. Like there's a whole system of how to do that, typically using this thing called prefabs, but I'll get to that in a minute. That thing is the Scorpitron, which if you get to it in the game, it's a scary ass giant robot. So challenges in the waste. At first, even though there was a $2.9 million budget, they essentially pared as much to the bone as they possibly could in order to conserve money, which I totally understand. But of course, there's this back and forth balance between quality and exactly what you can afford and finding the really sweet spot in between. So they were saying, oh, all we need are library sounds from sound libraries that you buy, in CDs or whatever. I was like, we'll just see about that. And we did later on in the production, and that changed, but yes, so their initial request was for little to no ambient effects, and one of the one of the reasons that I heard about that was that they said, well, the players are gonna listen to the music. They're not gonna turn the music down. And I was like, you wanna bet? There's a good portion of people that turn music down in a game. Some people want more, want it to be of a more immersive nature. Some people just want to be able to pay attention to the sounds that are going on. Some people want to hear the VO. They all have good reasons for it, but if you turn that music down and you hear absolutely nothing going on in the level, then that's really bad. We're not going to do that. So we got past that hump. All of the integration was requested to be done by this guy, Ben, on site. And Ben is a multi-talented scripter, and he's a really great guy. But as you well imagine, and as I predicted, I was like, well, okay, good luck with that. And then I produced a bunch of sounds over a period of about 4 months. And then about 6 months, or within about 6 months into the project, I got a phone call and an email saying, yeah, you think you could do some of this for us? Because Ben, of course, was tasked to do other stuff, I'm not going to say, really important stuff, but yeah, more level critical, gameplay critical mechanics that had to do with the actual functionality of the game and making it fun. You need to use all your resources in order to make that happen. And if you've got, a guy that's, that has talents in other areas doing nothing but audio, it actually hurts the game. So Clockstone, yes. Anybody here been to the Unity Asset Store? All right. Okay, so if you go into Unity and then there's a menu somewhere at the top which you can click on and it says Asset Store, you can just go straight to the Asset Store and you can purchase sound effects libraries, you can purchase music, you can purchase art assets, you can purchase plugins that essentially make this, let's turn this off here. I got a message asking me how I'm holding up. I'm actually holding up. It's amazing. So yeah, Clockstone is one of those engines. It's like $20, and it does have some cool functionality to it. But having said that, it can be incredibly complicated to get into. Every single level had to have several mandatory setups of scripted files that had to be dragged into your level hierarchy. And once you've done that, you need to be able to set up a naming convention so that those names need to be copied and pasted into the assignments for the sounds, which, as you can imagine, when you have 2,000 sounds, it can get pretty scary with making sure that you name your stuff right. And usually that's not something you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to copy and paste text or type in text. It's all supposed to be accessible through something called an enum menu. And enumerated type is just a programming term, and what that means is that it's a drop-down menu, and the drop-down menu already has all the names of everything that you've assigned and created right there, so that you don't worry about mistyping something. In Unity 4, there's a Unity 5 is in beta right now, and Unity 5 has a lot of improvements on 4. And in 4, one of the big issues was if you select a bunch of sounds or if you select a bunch of sound objects, you can't edit them all at the same time. You have to edit each one individually. So if we're talking volumes, there are mixed groups in this, but the mixed groups themselves are really difficult to figure out. So sometimes people would just say, I need this sound turned down, or I need this batch of sounds in this level turned down, the instances of those sounds, how they exist in that particular space. And I'd have to go in and edit them one at a time. And man, that's a pain. Okay. What that bullet point means, animation export from frame 0, is that when you want to time something out to an animation, like somebody swishes a sword, or in this case, like a pipe or a wood slat that they have as a weapon, you need to be able to obviously make sure that it's timed properly, it gets exported, assigned to the animation in the game, and that the timing is correct. So when you get the animation in the first place, you can preview it through Unity, but these guys were using a different system. So I would get certain animations that would be exported, but they would be exported from the game. And the reason that that's a slight issue is that you're guessing where they start. If you get an animation that just like from the moment you hit play, that's where the animation begins, you know where to start in terms of timing, and you know where to trigger it. Whereas if you do it blind, or rather more or less blind in terms of the timing, you put that in the game and all of a sudden the timing's off, or it's like, you know, up to a half a second late, and it's just like, that doesn't really work. So that was another challenge. Yes. In Unity, one of the standard functions that you have is a little speaker icon up there in your play menu, or excuse me, your play window. And when you hit that, while you're, you know, in what's called the scene window, you're not actually playing the game, but all of the particle effects are going, the lighting is on, and if you hit the little speaker button, you can hear all your ambient sounds. Thanks to Clockstone, that didn't actually happen. You actually have to hit play every time you put a sound in the game in terms of ambience, and then listen to see if it's actually correct. If it's not, then you have to hit play again, stop the game, go and edit the radius or the volume, and then hit play again to see if your change was actually taken. And that's how we used to do it in the old days, and oh my gosh, I'm glad we're out of the old days. So yes, this is a shout out for Ben Moyes. He is, I believe he's on Torment right now, if not Bard's Tale, one of the two or both. He's a younger guy, but my gosh, the coolness of that guy cannot be underestimated, because not only did he do stuff, but another thing that you have to learn when you're in the industry is how to repeat yourself. When somebody asks questions about how to do stuff, and we repeated ourselves a lot with like, how do I do this again? How do I do this again? How do I do this again? And he would send us spreadsheets, and he would send us long emails about how to get it done, and he never got pissed off. I'm sure he probably banged his head on the desk a couple times before responding to our emails, but that's as far as it got. Okay, so the production contacts there. Chris Keenan was the producer on Wasteland 2, and he's the main person that we talked to. He is also a young guy, and I don't know if this is his first project or not, but he was also great to work with. You know, a couple of bumps along the road, but that always happens on every project. You know, you have to work through misunderstandings and other issues like that. Montgomery Markland, I worked with him at Obsidian Entertainment, and he was an associate producer on this project. He's also a filmmaker, and they're working on an independent film called Malibu Road, and it's really good. And then Matthew Findley was the president of In Exile. He's sort of Brian Fargo's right-hand man, and we had a lot of discussions with him where he would clarify the stuff that Chris couldn't quite explain himself because he's been in the industry forever. So that was a good combination there. And Eric Daly would be the another associate producer that would do things like tell us when new builds would come out, and he would say when something was up on Steam that we could test, or he could essentially send me something in the mail if I needed a hard drive with a build. So. And Eric Schwartz, this guy was awesome. He's in Canada, and if I needed something from the game, like that was like, you know how it says like, where's the animation export and real-time previewing? Like, when you're in a game like Wasteland, they didn't have the means in order to skip ahead or to different parts of a level. So if I immediately needed to preview like a little mini cutscene or something like that, I had to actually go through, suit up my characters, play through the entire thing in order to get there. And that actually wastes quite a bit of time. So the people that already had save games in those areas, or the people that could get there quickly, are the QA support folks like Eric Schwartz. And he would go and he would vidcap all that stuff, and he would send it over to me on Dropbox, which was a lifesaver. All right, so this, I believe, is stored here, and hopefully it should play if I can click on it. There, dev segment example. Let's hopefully be, oh, come on now. Can I click in the middle here? Yes, there we go. So hopefully I should be able to narrate this. We'll see if it actually loads complete. Oh, QuickTime not available. Ah, that's not good. Well, we could have gone over this earlier with Flick, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is just essentially explain the basic parts of this with this little hand thing here. Okay, over here you have your hierarchy window, and this is what exists in each individual level space. So, like for example, right now we're in the very first level of the game, Ranger Citadel, right before you begin being narrated to or talked to by General Vargas, who's the guy that is the head of the Desert Rangers, and he sends you on your missions. And you're there at no spoilers because it's at the beginning of the game. You're there at a funeral for a guy named Ace, and he is a ranger that was killed, and you're not sure how he was killed or why, and one of your first missions, or your first mission, is to investigate why that is, and it's actually a pretty cool little mystery that you have to solve. But you're at his funeral, and a bunch of people are digging his grave, and he does some ceremony stuff. So let me see if I can find, where's my hand? Well, whatever. I'll just describe. if and where I can. So below the hierarchy window and the scene window where you actually see the level, you've got your project window. So at the bottom of the screen, pretty much taking up the bottom third of the screen. In there you can see a folder structure and you can see a bunch of audio files. So the way that it works is the hierarchy screen up top to the left of the actual gameplay window is where you have each individual level, all the assets for that level, and that represents that level's content. And then the project window below is where the entire project stuff lives. Like everything in the entire game is down in that little tree structure there. And so I would, like for example, the audio files that you see on the in the middle of the screen in that sort of large bottom window are all VO files for Vargas, and so those get triggered via the Clockstone engine. If I could play this video, what I would do is I would show you that inside the scene window, where you actually maneuver your camera and you're able to look around and see what's going on, you place individual audio sources. That is something that comes native to Unity right out of the box. You can go to the window at the top that says, I believe, component, yes. So you go to your component menu, you go to an audio source, and it can create something right within wherever your view is. And that creates a little speaker icon with a little circle around it. The speaker icon represents the sound, and the circle represents the radius of where that sound is going to play in the world. So then you click on it, and then you go over to the right-hand side, and that's where the inspector window is. The inspector window represents the properties of whatever file you have selected, whether it be in the hierarchy or the project menu or the actual, once you're in the project menu and then you actually select an individual file, the properties show up in the inspector window. So that was supposed to take up a good chunk of things. But yeah, let me get into audio middleware that would have really improved the process. Anybody here heard of Wise or Fmod? Okay, so we've got some nods coming in, but I'll explain for the other folks that don't know. Essentially, Clockstone was acquired at first because they were like, hey, it's cheap and we're going to use it. And they ended up using Ben Moyse to script most of the functionality in between Unity and this Clockstone engine so that we could actually do what we needed. Wise, even though it looks like W-Wise, they pronounce it Wise, it's called WaveWorks Interactive Sound Engine. And Fmod, I don't even know what that stands for, but it's been around for a long time. Both of them are audio middleware engines that exist as plugins to stuff like Unity or Unreal. And when you go into them, you have, I don't have internet access. When you go into them, you essentially are able to see the equivalent of like a digital audio workstation screen or a screen similar to the Unity window that you're looking at right now with a bunch of folders in which you can organize your audio assets, and you can create things like start and stop events, and you can mix, and you can add plugins for reverb and compression and all kinds of awesome stuff. It's essentially like your pro interface for the game itself, and it makes you program the functionality yourself right in there. And would it have been better to use those things than Clockstone? Yes. Oh my God, it would have been so much better. And I'm going to give you a quick example of that because of what's going on Torment. What's what? What's the what? Bottom line? Oh, how much does it cost? Well, Clockstone's $20. Wise has a scale, because that's what we're using on Torment. That has, if you're below $200,000 in your production budget, they charge you like $1,500 or something like that. No, $700, yes. If you're using it on a game with less than 200 sounds, it's free. So you can download it right now and you can use 200 sounds in it and do whatever you want with it, and they'll just let you use it. Over that, and then if the project budget is up to like 200K or something, yes, 200K, I think. So then from 200K to a certain amount, then it goes up to like 5,000, and the price on Torment, because Torment is over like 700 grand or something like that, it's the base price I think is like 14K or something like that. But there's some wiggle room there depending on the nature of the budget. I'm sorry, you have a question? I would recommend Wise. I don't particularly think that like Fmod is really bad because it's got some really good aspects about it, but I do think that Wise is used more ubiquitously in the industry than Fmod is. It's got it also has a little bit of an easier learning curve. And here's the weird part. Fmod Studio, which is the new version of Fmod, was designed to look like a digital audio workstation. And unfortunately, it's not quite as intuitive, and there's not as many tutorial videos on YouTube as there are with Wise. So it's just not as easy to get into. So that's my personal preference. There's some people like Stefan Schütz, who is the guy that does the Fmod tutorial videos, and wow, I mean he makes magic with that stuff. So yeah, there's bottom line for Wise and Fmod. The thing about both of those engines, oh yeah, I was going to give you an example in Torment, the project that we're working on right now. There's going to be a backer release that's going to come out at some point. That's going to show off the conversational system in the game, and I think that's already viewable within the teaser, but it's going to be playable for backers pretty soon. They have a special editor that they use for editing conversations, and it looks like a flowchart. And when you're going into this flowchart and you look at what are called these nodes, these little boxes that have text in them, you click on a box and you're able to assign various properties. And one of the properties is, does an audio file play? And we want these conversations to be really, like audio is going to be a really key part in making the conversations a lot cooler and making them more immersive, because a good portion of the game is going to be conversation. Anybody here play Planescape Torment, the original Planescape Torment? Yeah. All right. Okay, if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Go to goodoldgames.com, GOG.com, and download it for one of their, we're selling it for 50 cents today sales, and check it out, because it's showing, it's getting a little long in the tooth as far as amazing graphics and whatnot, but it's got one of the best stories, hands down, of any role-playing game ever, thanks to the marvelous Chris Avallone, who is also contributing to, or who contributed to Wasteland, I believe, who's also helping out on Torment. So we've got this editor that has all these nodes in it. We're going to node. Some of them look like these massive trees of conversational stuff that goes on, all this dialogue, and you click on one of those things, and in Wasteland, I would have had to have asked Ben to do something, or he would have said, here's a spreadsheet, or here's a script file, and it would have been a nightmare. Like for me, now that we use Wise, recently there was an example of where I have to create wind that gradually rises in intensity throughout the conversation, and it has to do it smoothly and crossfade into different files. And so I was asking, I was trying to figure out how to do that, and all of that is possible within Wise. No touching of Unity whatsoever, just getting into the conversational tool and assigning a single play event, and then a number to represent exactly where which is called a real-time parameter, or TPC, real-time parameter control is in Wise. You just set the number, and then the wind goes where you want it to within the conversation. It's wonderful. It's so you set the number. It's you can set the behavior of how fast it takes in order to get to that crossfade of going and back up and down. So, and all these questions I was asking, there is a scripter that does help me out on the Torment project with audio stuff, but he's on other stuff, because I'll ask him a question and say, hey, can you do this maybe for me and make this sound stop smoothly with a fade out? And he's like, there should be an event in Wise for that already. And I'm like, really? And I go and I right click on one of the audio files, and it says you can say create event. And sure enough, there's a stop event, and when you go into the stop event, there's a fade time and a little curve that you can set it's just awesome. So that's a real blessing. It saves a lot of time. It creates for more iterative power so that you can create better stuff. Yes, and back to Wasteland, the pain of Wasteland. The key is the core scripting properties. And this is really sort of for people that are hardcore. I'm not saying I'm not necessarily hardcore, but if you have people that have the time and the ability to delve into the scripting capabilities of Unity, you can do anything you want, and it will also give you power to be able to say, hey, guess what? I'm a game scripter. I can go from project to project, and there's probably almost nobody on the team that does what I can do, because oh my gosh, it takes a bit to get to learn this stuff, but there's tutorials on it. So let me explain exactly how this works a little bit. On the left-hand side of the screen, you've got the actual scripts themselves with C# code. And you've essentially learning this stuff is not nearly as hard as learning something like C++ or some, Java or whatever the core languages are. Since it's a scripting, it's more macro. You basically learn some rules about how to indent and the semicolons and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, bleh, and you go blind for a few weeks, and then you get used to it. It starts. Right now I don't even see the code. I just see blonde, brunette, redhead. That's kind of how it turns out after a while. And what happens? The cool thing about Unity is that there's the means to do something simple that it takes like 2 seconds to learn. It's a function called var, and VAR, and when you put that in, depending on exactly what script you're in, if you put VAR in and then you type a name for something and then you type another property in the script, it shows up in the GUI. So on the right-hand side, you've got the property window, and you put that into the script, and then it compiles it with this little, this little thing, sort of, you see this timer run for a couple of seconds, and then you go check your inspector window, which is over on the right-hand side, and oh my God, a little checkbox will appear, or a little drop-down box will appear, or a place where you can input a number will appear. And that is awesome. I mean, it is so much better to do something like that. And program once and then GUI the rest, I think, is a really good way to go. Having said that, there's also tools in Unity that enable you to visualize all of your scripts through a flowcharting method. Anybody here use the Unreal Engine, whether it's the current one or the previous one? Okay. So that's where I grew up, is really using the Unreal Engine. But for the longest time, it had this tool in it called Kismet, which was, again, another flowchart system, but that's how you programmed your level behavior. And all of the stuff that normally existed in these complex coding, scripting things in Unity was visual. It was just a series of boxes that would all connect together. And you could say, okay, the player is here, enemy hit, then this particle effect spawns, and then you right-click, and then you set whatever the particle effect is. It goes into the particle editor, and you can edit it there. Unity has plugins that enable it to do that sort of functionality, so it's not necessarily as intimidating as learning the scripting itself. Does this thing go until 1:30? Okay, good. I'm glad it doesn't go until 2, because I was like, I know. I'm just going to have audience participation. We're all going to sing stuff. That's right. There's going to be Q&A too. I got to get to the Q&A portion here in a little bit. So we think, oh yes, and the focus. Wait, yes, I'm sorry. The key is the focus. So getting back to the original purpose of one of the original bullet points was, it really helps when you've got complex systems for integration and low budgets to focus on what is going to sound the best in the game. And I really hope, oh, that's right. Since Chris is here, he might be able to help. Hold on a second, because I've got a video that I need to play again. But for some reason, it says there's no QuickTime. Hold on a second. QuickTime not available. Is there? Oh, yeah. See, I can't install it because there's no internet either. Derp, derp, herp, derp. Okay, let's go back. So yeah, I mean, really, what it does is it makes you focus really, really carefully on, what I'm going to do? I'm just going to play the sound from my phone since it has LTE. It makes it so that you're just looking at whether it's a cinematic or whether it's something that's, really, really important, like the skill systems. And I'll explain the skill systems a little bit. Skills are how you accomplish things in the game that require specific tasks, like lockpicking or demolitions or alarm disarming or brute force when you need to get into a door that's jammed or barred or something like that. Those are all skills that you need to put skill points into in order to develop your character. It's very similar to Deus Ex, as a matter of fact, sort of like the biomods that you get in order to augment your character's abilities. So in Wasteland, we decided that skills needed their own specific sound, and they needed the ability to sound really as though they were ramping up over a certain period of time, depending on how your skill points were. So we had to set up a system where you would go from 1 second to 8 seconds, depending on your skill points, and it would slowly ramp up. Like the lockpicking would go, and if you do it, it'll go, and you'll be like, oh yes, that's so satisfying. Or you'll hear this, or like, like when you don't actually do something. And we want the player to feel, almost viscerally upset, through the sounds when that doesn't actually happen, because they didn't really have any animation to represent that at all. So putting focus into those areas was really, really critical, and it's always a challenge because, again, not the biggest budget in the world, so you have to sit down at the beginning of the project and say exactly where are the high points and the accents of the game and how's that going to work. So there was the video that we would play if we had QuickTime, but yes, having not gone over that with, that's totally my responsibility. I will take the brunt of that. All right, so now we're on to Q&A about Wasteland 2, and I will take any questions that you guys have. Yes, I did the ping for perception. Yeah. Oh, seriously? Oh, man, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, that's a good point. I use it for when just to look for stuff, like because there's like a spare item here, or there might be something that I hadn't found over there. But oh, man. Ding, 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 ding. Like it's like a sonar ping, and perception is when you're actually, yeah. What? Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Well, what's funny too is that there was how when you go into a conversation and you have like this little guitar-ish thing, just like it was a little happy. When it went into the game, like everybody was playing it, I was playing it. I was just like, yeah, it sounds like. And I did it using Omnisphere. I was just like, there's this steel guitar sound that you can use where you pitch up. It has like a sort of a boing, like a dobro or something like that. And that I thought that was fitting with the world, but it was a little on the happy side. And when they were playing it, it was kind of funny because like the producer, Chris Keenan, was just like, yeah, I think we're going to have to change that. But then like a couple of backers came in and said that they loved it, and Fargo said that he loved it. And so Chris is like, I guess we're keeping it in. Happy conversation sound stays in the game. So yeah, fun little moments like that. Yes. So the question is exactly how did from the library to more complex, more custom-made sounds work, right? So essentially, some of it was Foleyed and recorded in a booth. Like there would be some stuff like I would get some celery. That's for every project, you can always get very unique fleshy sounds by getting celery and lettuce, pretty much celery and lettuce, and just crunching it up close to a microphone. It's unbelievable the kind of really fleshy sounds you can get. And the stuff that was in our library, like the General 6000 and these other older ones that you have, I'm sure there's ones that are either on the asset store or available through places like Sonnis.com, SONNISS, that they have like individual, like just specific sound libraries just for like guns or just for flesh sounds or just stuff like that. There might be some that are really good, but when you can just do that stuff yourself, it's really easy. So we did some of that sort of thing. A lot of the guns ended up being library sounds that we didn't really go back and fine tune. And recently, Chris, the producer, got in touch and said, maybe we could really pump these up. And we went back and forth a little bit, but man, that guy was patient. He was, he wasn't like, okay, this sucks and you suck and blah, 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 blah. He had gone to other games and said, I'm really doing some A/B comparisons with I think he said Call of Duty, I'm not sure, but I think it was a first-person game. Now, the thing that I needed to explain was that there's a difference between a top-down view, a third-person view, and a first-person experience, because a lot of times you have stereo field of the guns going off, and it's not pinpointed in a mono source that's just emanating from that one spot in a mono way, and so it's not full field in your ears, and you don't hear it that way. But he was talking specifically about the power level of the sounds, and he referenced a library that I hadn't heard before, and I was just like, well, let's friggin' download the library and put those sounds in. Why not? So, I mean, that process and other processes of just, using combinations of library sounds within like a multi-track DAW, like I use Nuendo or Cubase or whatever, and there's Reaper as well, and it's fantastic. You do the same thing. You just line up a number of different sounds that all need to essentially communicate what you're trying to do for that particular case. And so that's most of what we did was that. We used like a combination of some stuff that we've recorded, in the field or Foley ourselves. And I'd say that's maybe 10 to 20%. And then the rest would be like, we do have a vast existing library of like multiple stuff that you can get from like Sound Ideas is a company that sells most of them. Like the General 6000 is the one that has been around forever, and there's a lot of sounds on there that people are very familiar with, like the like for a fire, or the like the freaking mouse click. Like, no mice sound like that anymore. Stop doing mice clicks in commercials that sound like. But it sounds so satisfying, right? So all of that stuff comes from General 6000. So we've augmented that with a lot of other libraries that are on sale. Like there's the Pro Sound Effects libraries, there's the Sonus libraries, but a lot of times when there's something really specific, the best thing to do is to get a Zoom H2N or a Zoom H6 and just go out and record it yourself, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, do you have to make sure you buy a synchronization license? How does licensing work for sound libraries? That's a really good question. I'm going to do like sort of a side track to that by saying that in Omnisphere, anybody here heard of Omnisphere, the plug-in instrument? Okay. It's the equivalent of the Korg M1 of this generation. It is like, has like a ton, and the Omnisphere 2 just came out, and I'm like a schoolgirl. I'm really giddy about that. It's got a ton of amazing sounds and a ton of ways to manipulate them, and there's even a section that you can look up that's a category of its own sound called sound effects. But in the license for Omnisphere, it says you cannot like hold down a key, record that sound, and then put it into a production, whether it's a game or a film. I've done it anyway. Usually that's because I manipulate whatever it is pretty heavily before it goes into the game anyway. So I'm kind of in the clear there. But like typically when you buy a sound library, what the deal is, they just don't want you to take those sounds and resell them. Like the license, now read the licenses, but usually the license will say you can use this in any kind of production you want. You can use it in music, you can use it in games, you can use it in films, you can blah, 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 blah. Just don't like rip them and like put them in your own library and put them out yourself and sell them. Yeah. Any other questions? I've got, let's see. We've got about 13 minutes, and so I could, oh yeah, I was going to play hold on a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for that Scorpitron cinematic and play the sounds from it, because that was what was supposed to play there. So, Wasteland 2. Now, you won't be looking at it, but you can just picture it in your head, and the audio will do the storytelling. Scorpitron. Let's see if this is the right one. Scorpitron Boss. Yes, I think this is it. Scorpitron Fight, maybe? Here, let's try this. No, he hasn't bust through this isn't where he busts through the building. Hold on. Let's see if this is it.
Hectate here playing.
Hey everybody, I'm going to narrate everything. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to play you guys the opening movie, and it's narrated, so you'll get to hear what goes on. Here we go. The only thing necessary for good to triumph, or evil to triumph, is for good men to do nothing.
What comes after the end? I don't know. Neither did they. They were just an Army engineer battalion.
That's General
constructing
Vargas.
Roads and bridges deep in the middle of the Arizona nowhere. They didn't know why Armageddon had come. They'd heard radio chatter about an attack on some space-based missile platform. But who had attacked it or why. No one knew. What they did know is that the politicians and the generals had finally ended the world. Now, everything was gone. They took over a federal prison for a fort, kicked out the convicts, got busy starting from scratch. Maybe it was an act of mercy. Maybe they figured that the prisoners would die out in the harsh new world. Whichever, it came back to bite the engineers in the ass. Cultists, criminals, cannibals. They've been living with the fallout ever since.
Fallout.
Good people had survived too. Called for help in the night. And those engineers, those common soldiers, could not stand by and see them die. So they came out of their fort, and they helped the survivors defend their homes. And for that, they earned a new name, a proud name, the Desert Rangers. Now, Rangers, I know it seems at times our cause is hopeless.
This is the start of the funeral that you're.
It's hard to say goodbye to a brother in arms. But I want you to know something else. That no ranger who dies in the line of duty will ever be forgotten. Nor will he ever have died in vain or unavenged.
And that's how it starts. So cool. Any other questions? Let's stop this for a second. Hold on. That was the first two. So it would be the original Deus Ex and then Invisible War. And there was a theme from UNATCO that was used in Seraph when you walk into Seraph for the first time. And then at the end of the game, after the credits, they replay the original theme, which was very cool. Yes? Siren Synapse? Yes, I do. I'm glad you like that one. Yeah, that was with Big Giant Circles, Jimmy Henson, who was conspicuously absent because he's at PAX South. Bastard. Yeah, well, I'm glad you like it. Cool, right on. Let's see, anything else? One quick explanation. Like the movie that I just played for you guys, I actually didn't do any of the audio in that, and I didn't, none of the video. That was all shot by, some of the sounds, I guess, that we put into the game were included in that movie, but the voice actors were all done in Newport Beach, and they hired those guys there. And so Monty Markland used, and I don't remember who General Vargas is, but he was really good. So Monty hired those guys, and he hired actual actors, screen actors, and then lip-synced the voice actors over the guys that were doing the screen acting. Because the voice actors were hired first. So they all shot that stuff, and Monty produced it, and essentially they just exported it, and I just made sure that it was mixed okay and didn't play too loud once the game started. So I'm not sure what the budget was for that kind of thing, and I don't know what you'll also notice that I don't think I have VO in there, and I'm not sure what they spent on VO either. But yeah. Any more questions? Okay, question was, were the voice actors hired and did they get a residual, or was it a buyout, or how did the payment structure work? A lot of the way things work in games is with buyout. And oddly enough, a lot of the way things work for SAG-AFTRA actors in whether it's games or voiceover for films is pretty much some sort of standard fee that doesn't include residuals. Now, if you're really big, like, it could be Tom Hanks or whoever doing the voice acting, then I'm sure you can probably negotiate a residual of some sort. But for most games, it's just a fee. For this game, I don't think it was done under union auspices. I shouldn't have said that with this being filmed, but it's essentially California is something where, like, well, although, you know what, if it was completely non-union, it's okay. I think it was completely non-union, so actually, they're saved. It's in California. The way that works is it has to be either union, non-union. If you're union, you use all union actors. You use union rates, which they started around like 800 and something for like 4 hours of VO. And that's a typical interactive rate. The interactive rates change, and so you always have to check their website, and you need to make sure that you call a SAG representative and work with somebody called a signatory. And the signatory is somebody that makes sure that everything's done by the book, that all the proper paperwork is submitted, like there's federal taxes that needed to get taken out, and all that stuff needs to get done. So that's how it works on the union side. On the non-union side, it's anything goes. A lot of game companies have gotten in trouble for using combinations of union and non-union voice acting. In Texas, though, it's a different thing a little bit because it's called a right-to-work state. And what that means is that you can have a project that includes both non-union and non-union actors, but I think the rule is you have to pay them whatever the union scale is or whatever the highest amount is. So it's not like completely like you can say, hey, we're going to bring you in as a union actor and we're only going to pay you like $200 or something like that. So yeah, the entire world of pay scales for VO is somewhat strange. And what I'll do is I'll shout out to Game Audio Network Guild, which even whether you're a member or a non-member, I'm not sure if you have to be a member to see this. There is a white paper on the way unions work, not just SAG-AFTRA, but also AFM, American Federation of Musicians, which I don't know if anybody here has heard about the sort of debacle surrounding poor Austin Wintory, who has been fined for recording an orchestra in Dallas for a game that was produced in California or something like that. It's kind of crazy, but the gang document doesn't comment on stuff like that, but what it does do is say, what are the unions for? How do they work? Who do you talk to? Where's the websites? Just what's the deal? And because a lot of people are like, I don't know how it works, or it seems pretty complicated, and that's what the document tries to explain. So audiogang.org is the place to go yes, we have work to do on our website, but you should be able to go to a menu item that says like content or resources, I believe is the menu item, and that's where that document's located. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we have like 3 or 2 minutes left, so we're kind of close to the end. Is any last questions anybody has? You can ask about Deus Ex, or you can ask about Unreal or Unreal Tournament, or Wasteland 2, or Torment, or Skyrim, because I did a couple of voices on Skyrim. Happy to answer questions about that too. As a normal player, strictly and truthfully, I have played all the way through to the end of Ag Center, and that's it. It's sad. It really is. Like, it's horrible, I know. But when I say play, I mean I went nuts by outfitting my characters, making sure that I did a ton of save games, looking in every possible nook and cranny for clues and everything like that. So what I want to be able to do is to, since I have a save game before Ag Center, I want to choose High Pool instead. Because, that's something first of all, I recommend everybody go to Steam and download Wasteland 2. I don't do that for every single one of my games. I don't say you have to play this game because it's amazing. How many people here like role-playing games, just RPGs? I really recommend Wasteland 2. It's got this really cool atmosphere. I mean, it's got the whole Fallout thing going on for it, and it's also got a lot of the Fallout humor as well. But having said that, I mean, it's kind of addictive because when you get into it, the first thing you have to do is solve a murder, and you follow a blood trail, and it's just this is cool. This isn't just wandering around talking to people about how horrible the state of the world is, and I need to save it from this evil magic that's come down from the sky, and oh my gosh, I need to, what's this thing on my arm? Sorry. And I like Dragon Age Inquisition. It's kind of cool, but it doesn't, you require really deep characterization in order to get, in order to attach yourself to the story. Whereas in Wasteland, it's not quite like that at all. It's got a lot of the old school aspects of it where you see clues and you get drawn in by those clues. And not just that, but I mean, some of the characters you meet are kind of insane. So yeah, everybody get it and buy it because it's awesome. It's fun. Yes, of course. Yes. Do I have a website? Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I have several. There's funkyrustic.net is where my company is, and there's like an info@funkyrustic.net email, which will go to me. Then there's an alexanderbrandon.net Bandcamp page, which I believe has a means to email me directly from there. There's also, if you look up Alexander Brandon and or Funky Rustic on Facebook, both of those things should show up. And I talk to people, I talk to fans through my fan page, and so if I get invites from my personal Facebook page, if I don't really know who that person is, I might just leave it there for a while until I actually meet him, or not instantly accept. I'm sure that's kind of standard social network behavior anyway. So yeah, all of that stuff is out there, and there's also Twitter. Funky Rustic is on Twitter as well, and we tweet weird stuff every now and again. Like I love getting tweets from these guys that are retweeting stuff that people will talk about. Like old games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles NES, and like they'll put a box shot of that up there, and I have no choice but to retweet that kind of stuff because I love it. Or Bayou Billy. Anybody played Adventures of Bayou Billy for NES? That game's cool. So yeah, all right. I think that's all we got. Thanks everybody for coming.